Oh my gosh, Nintendo Switch 2's holiday is starting to look absolutely stacked with these latest leaks and recent discoveries. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and even though it's a holiday, there is still much to discuss when it comes to Nintendo, including some recent info about a data breach from a Nintendo partner that is perhaps telling us a lot more about the Nintendo Switch 2 than Nintendo would like us to know, and also, there's been a recent discovery that I think is adding even more credence to this theory I've had for a major Nintendo game to come out later this year. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches on June 5th. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So as a bit of a warm-up here, I'd like to point out some recent news from the Nintendo Today app. Nintendo released new footage of the Switch 2 home menu, where you can see that with the mouse controls for the Joy-Con 2's, you have access to a typical mouse cursor, which I find to be a nice little neat new feature. They also show off how you can use a control stick, kind of like a scroll wheel for a mouse, and also the functionality of being able to switch seamlessly from mouse mode to Joy-Con mode, and everything works accordingly, seamlessly, instantly, there are no issues. Now we knew a bit about this already from the Nintendo Treehouse and Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, but it's nice to see it all up close, and also to see that in the home menu you can use the mouse controls that actually have a nice little cursor. But now let's move on to this big story about this data breach from a Nintendo partner. That Nintendo partner is Arc System Works. Arc System Works is responsible for some amazing games, such as Dragon Ball FighterZ and the Guilty Gear series. They make incredible fighting games. So that's why I was actually very excited to hear about yesterday. We touched on this actual story a little bit yesterday, that they're working on a game according to this leak from X0X Leak, who apparently has a very reliable history of leaking things, including everything about Marvel Rivals. But they have said that there is a code name for this game, and it's Wadati, which means in Japanese migration or fairy. But this game is supposed to be coming out November 25th during the holidays. It's going to be made with Unreal Engine 5.4, and yes, it is a Switch 2 exclusive, at least in the beginning, I'm going to assume. So this would be a big deal, huge game to come out during the holidays. We've already seen Nintendo announce some pretty significant exclusives that are coming out for Nintendo Switch 2, such as the Duskbloods, a From Software game, but that's a 2026 release. This game, codenamed Watati, whatever ends up being called, is going to be a significant release for this holidays, and when you start to factor it alongside other things that may be coming out this holidays from Nintendo themselves, things are starting to look pretty impressive. But let's hone in on this data breach from Arc System Works here, because it's not just this project that we have learned about, but rather a lot more. So for example, apparently there is some leaked documentation that is implying that Nintendo Switch 2 was originally meant to release this past March, which I find to be a very curious, interesting situation. If you've been following me for a while, you may remember a few months back, last year, we were predicting that Nintendo would actually reveal the Switch 2 in the September-October period. It felt like there was a lot of evidence to support this idea, but it did not happen. We had to wait a few months more. About 3 months more, which is when Nintendo revealed the console in January, and the console's coming out in June, 3 months later than March. So it seems to suggest that the evidence that we were seeing had some merit, but it was delayed, at least according to this data breach from Arc System Works. And this is increasingly more interesting because we go back like a year and a half ago, there were a variety of reports from many reputable outlets that were saying that the Switch 2 was supposed to be coming out holiday of 2024 in the second half of 2024, and obviously that did not happen. So if we were to believe this data breach, if we were to believe these reputable outlets about all these reports, the Nintendo Switch 2 internally has been delayed repeatedly. So I then asked myself, what is up with all these different delays? Why did this happen? There may be a variety of possibilities. I don't think it's because they were still taking more time to get the hardware ready. I mean in terms of research and development, because we've already learned from the leak of the motherboard, they likely have had this system, this chipset all ready to go for quite some time. Now, manufacturing it, that's a whole other thing, and then when you take into consideration the value of the Japanese yen and just the overall global economic climate, I can see why maybe they might have wanted to have waited a little bit for those reasons. But then you also look at the tariff situation that's going on right now. In hindsight, it might have made more sense for the Switch 2 to come out sooner than later. All these things are just speculation though. We do not know the exact reason why Nintendo has delayed the Switch 2. However, usually when you have repeated delays like this, it's because you need to get games ready. And regardless of whether the Switch 2 was actually delayed to get the games ready or not, the more likely big games will be ready. Which I also think bodes well for this holiday lineup for Nintendo Switch 2 to be rather stacked. Now, of course, this is the launch for the Nintendo Switch 2. It's the first year, the first holiday season. They're definitely going to want to do that. But before I dive further into this topic, there's still more to learn about this data breach here. Something else that's come out from these leaks of Arc System Works is that apparently there are 3 types of formats for the Nintendo Switch 2 games. You have your DL, digital game only, your 64GB cartridge with where you can put the full game on there, and then this Potion codename for the game key card format. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, the game key card is basically just a cartridge that doesn't actually have the game on there. It's just a key that when you put into your system, it allows you to download the game on there, and it works whenever the cartridge is on there. So basically, it works like your typical cartridge or disc would. You just have to do an initial download, and if you take it out, you can no longer play the game. But if you put that cartridge in another system with a different account, you just have to download it again and it will work. So it is something you can trade, lend, borrow, or resell. But still, many people are not a fan of having to do a full initial download for any game they're buying physically. So it's actually been a very controversial, hotly debated situation because it's looking like most third-party games are on game key cards. Nintendo games, they're all fully on the cartridges, but not third-party games. Most of them are not, at least. And now seeing from this leak here that apparently the only option where you can put your games on a cartridge is the 64GB option, this might explain why. A 64GB cartridge would be pretty expensive. Apparently, these cartridges cost about $16 USD. So think about that for a moment. That's pretty expensive. That would take quite a bit away from the profit margin from any company releasing these games. On Switch 1, there were other possibilities. There were smaller sizes, but on Switch 2, at least according to this data breach, there are not. Now, it does have me wondering, is this a case for also Nintendo as well? Because we see games like Donkey Kong Bonanza, they're selling for $70, and we know that's a 10GB game that can easily fit on a 64GB cartridge. In fact, it could easily fit on a 32 or 16GB cartridge. So does Nintendo still give themselves access to all these other smaller cartridge sizes so they can enjoy better profit margins and are only offering 64GB to third-party partners? Or is this just a case across the board? We do not know. Getting back to the overall main topic for this video though, we are seeing signs that Nintendo is going to have a pretty stellar holiday lineup. So I've been theorizing for a while that there needs to at least be one more big holiday title from Nintendo that is a Switch 2 exclusive. Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, Pokemon Legends EA look like are coming during the September to December period of the year. Those will definitely help to bolster the lineup. Kirby Air Riders as well. Maybe even Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. Recently we did see the Nintendo for a little while listed the game as Winter 2025 and then changed it to just Winter. So we're not sure what's going on with that game. Initially it was announced as just a winter game, not necessarily a 2025 title. It might just squeeze into 2025, and Nintendo prematurely put out that info before the next big direct, presumably this June. We're not sure. Either way though, it still seems like there's gotta be at least one more big Switch 2 exclusive from Nintendo. And a lot of you following me may know what I'm getting at here. I think it might be Luigi's Mansion 4. It could be something else. That's totally fine. And if you're curious on the entire theory, I have an entire dedicated video to that idea. But it looks like we found more evidence to support this theory. And shoutouts to Khalid on Twitter who pointed this out to me. But Next Level Games has been hiring for a new project. And I think this is kind of a big deal because it might be suggesting that they are moving on to a new project because they may be finished with another big project that could potentially be coming out this year. As you see here in the bullets, they say play a large part in the look and feel of our next exciting title. Now, so you understand what I'm getting at here, when you look at the history of next level game releases, they come out with a game every 3 years, very consistently. Across the 3DS to the Switch, that significant leap in technology led to no delays every 3 years. Last time was Strikers in 2022, so here we are in 2025. Nintendo needs another big game. There aren't too many options left, so through process of elimination, I feel like Next Level Games is a likely candidate. They've made a couple of the Luigi's Mansion games, and Luigi's Mansion 3 is one of the most successful. Now that we're seeing that they've been hiring for a new project, it suggests like they're ready to move on, implying that perhaps whatever they've been working on over the last few years will indeed maintain this pattern they've had for quite some time of games coming out every 3 years. Of course, patterns can be broken, and just because there's hirings does not guarantee that they are done with their project or that the game will be coming out this year. As we take a look at this LinkedIn profile listing here, we see that Tatum Plunnett has been putting out these hiring posts for Next Level Games because they are looking. This was put out 3 days ago. However, we look at her post, she's been posting about this for a few months already, for about 4, and then it stops. But it stops because, well, she wasn't always working for Next Level Games. She started working for them, a contract position, 5 months ago. However, when we take a look at the LinkedIn profile for Next Level Games themselves, they've only been talking about hiring for the last 4 months. This was posted 4 months ago. That's it. There's nothing else beyond that. So I then wonder, did they delete prior posts? I'm not sure, but it seems like they've only just recently started hiring for whatever it is that they're hiring for, whatever this project is. And certainly, they've been working on something in the meanwhile these last few years. They have a pretty consistent pattern for coming out with games here. I would assume they've been hard at work on whatever is going to come out next for Switch 2. And with these new hiring posts, I do feel a little bit better about my theory that they are wrapping up on whatever big game they have planned for this year. It looks like they may actually stick to the pattern here. And it might just be, perhaps, Luigi's Mansion 4. Of course, I will point out, even if the game is done, Nintendo could decide to sit on the game for another time because they could have something else ready instead, which could be equally as exciting, if not even more so. And so when you consider that it looks like we are getting this exclusive Arc System Works game for Nintendo Switch 2 this holiday, and then maybe we're getting some other big exclusive from Next Level Games to come out this year, on top of other releases like Prime 4, Pokemon Legends EA, Kirby Air Riders, maybe Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, the lineup is starting to look pretty strong. Now, I'll point out something else. Ubisoft has recently basically confirmed that a variety of games, big games, are coming to Nintendo Switch 2, like Rainbow Six Siege and Assassin's Creed Mirage and Shadows. All these games seemingly are coming to Nintendo Switch 2. We got Star Fox Outlaws as well. So that's a lot of support from Ubisoft, but I bring this up because typically for the beginning of a Nintendo generation, Ubisoft is there day one. They put out games immediately, but usually they also have like an exclusive they've been working on for the console. There's no Red Steel or Zombie U or Mario Raving Rabbids that's been shown off yet. Now, Mario Rabbids Kingdom Battle, the big Switch 1 exclusive that Ubisoft was working on, that game was not announced until E3 of 2017, so after the Switch came out. So perhaps for the next big Nintendo Direct, maybe late June, early July, that's where we see the expected big Ubisoft exclusive. That's where they show it off. What that might be, I do not know. I will throw out this idea just because I really love the idea. But what if, after Starlink and how Starlink was the most successful on Nintendo Switch with the Star Fox content, Nintendo and Ubisoft came together and decided, hey, let's start building a game for Switch 2 where we can appropriately achieve the vision of a next-generation Star Fox game. And maybe that's what they've been working on, and maybe we'll see that announced this summer. That is some hopium, but I do feel like there's definitely a significant history of Ubisoft and Nintendo working together on some sort of interesting exclusive, and they did find a decent amount of success working with different Nintendo IP, so maybe it's not that much of a stretch. I would not be surprised if a big deal Star Fox game can sell 3 to 5 million copies. That would probably be seen as a pretty successful investment for Ubisoft, so maybe they would go forward with an idea like this. Fingers crossed. Again, just speculation with not too much evidence to support it, although I do think eventually Nintendo will do something Star Fox, and maybe they would need to bring in some sort of partner. But what do you make of all this latest information surrounding Nintendo Switch 2 and how stacked the holidays may be for this console? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.